I will now call this joint City Council and Planning Commission work session meeting to order at 6 o'clock. I'd like to call on Jody. Is Jody going to be online or not coming?
Jody sends her regards. She's on an airplane right now to Spain.
Oh.
For a 3-week vacation. She's very sad to miss this work session, I'm sure.
I'm sure. So Heather, you're here with our consultants. So Heather Richards, Community Development Director, to present our topic.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor, Councilors, and Planning Chair and Commissioners. Like I said, Jody Christensen has been our project manager for this project. We're going to talk to you tonight about McMinnville Landing, which we have commonly called the Innovation Campus here in McMinnville until we started branding it as McMinnville Landing, and we'll talk you through that a little bit tonight. Regionally, we had this planned for a little earlier this year and had to postpone it to sort of move around some some city projects and discussions and work sessions. So this did fall on a night where she is going on a planned vacation, so she sends her regards. But I wanted to introduce this topic to you by saying this is really started back in 2018 when we got a transportation and growth management grant to do the 3-mile lane area plan. The purpose behind that was there was some significant vacant land in the area that's north and south of Highway 18 here in McMinnville, and with growing with needs for more buildable land and understanding how we were going to serve the community moving forward, we thought that it would make sense to really take a deeper dive into this particular area and start talking about how can these lands best serve McMinnville's future. So we did an area plan for 1,340 acres through that process. We looked at land uses, and then we looked at transportation scenarios because we wanted to make sure that we were protecting Highway 18 in terms of its functionality, and we're aware of the local impact as well as of those land use scenarios. So from that process, we adopted a 3-mile lane area plan, and it identified what's considered an innovation district within there, which was looking at these 3 properties that are vacant just south of Highway 18 that are east of the hospital that are about 200 acres, and they've been in the city for over 40 years at this point in time and had not developed, and we were asking our questions, why haven't they developed, and how can these properties serve McMinnville moving forward? At the same time, we did a lot of analysis as to what the city's needs are, and through that process, we learned that there were a couple of needs that we have not addressed adequately in McMinnville. One being retail needs in terms of general merchandise, and 2 being high-density employment, so more of your R&D type of employment, office space, knowledge jobs, those types of things that McMinnville lost when the Hewlett-Packard campus left McMinnville. So we started talking about how can this 200-acre site help serve McMinnville in those 2 regards. We adopted an area plan that has the innovation district identified in it, and identified the opportunity to have both a retail center there and then this sort of high employment land as well. So to remind you, we talked a lot about the retail center being approximately 40 acres. The language in the plan is 33 net acres, and we spent about a year in public hearing process really going through what does that size look like in terms of how to serve the community best and serve that area. And then we had about 160 acres for the innovation campus. When we were looking at the retail piece of it, we were looking at it from 3 different perspectives. One, the community need that I shared with you. So we did that market analysis to show all that retail leakage that was occurring, especially for general merchandise. But we also learned that there was piggyback leakage occurring as well when people are leaving town to get general merchandise. They were also participating in spending money at restaurants. They were taking a day out of McMinnville as a community. We then also talked about the fact that there's a desert in this area in terms of food for the neighborhoods that are in the 3-mile lane area, and a need for a grocery store there and some other amenities, so the retail center is meant to serve that. And then thirdly, what we had heard from the businesses that were located in that area, we did have some high-density employment businesses located there with those knowledge-based jobs that we were trying to encourage more of, and they indicated to us that it's nice Class A office space in that area, but it's also in a desert for their employees, so the employees didn't have a place to go grab a quick lunch and things of that nature. And they were the ones encouraging us to really think of this as a larger campus network instead of just individual developments. The other thing I want to also bring to the table as we go into this discussion is, as we were talking through, how this 200-acre site can serve the community and why hadn't it developed in 40 years, we learned that there were significant infrastructure costs associated with it. Because of its adjacency to the highway, which makes it a great site for many, it also makes it an expensive site in terms of infrastructure needs to support it. And when we had industrial, it's zoned industrial. When we had industrial development look at it, the infrastructure costs turned out to be a barrier towards development of them moving forward. In the 9 years I've been here, we've had several people look seriously at it and not able to move forward. You never know what their final decisions are. I'm always assuming there's several things that are leaning into the decision not to move forward, but we did hear the infrastructure concerns from them. So as we were thinking through retail needs and we were thinking through infrastructure costs, the other reason why we started looking at a retail center in this area was because the retail development could carry more of the infrastructure costs than the industrial development could. And so by placing it in this area to meet the needs that I just described earlier, which was community, neighborhood, business district, it could also offset those infrastructure costs, bringing infrastructure to the site so the industrial could build off of that. So with that said, after we adopted the 3-mile lane area plan, we then had a discussion of this as the city to say, okay, what really are those infrastructure costs? How do we understand that a little bit better? And that's when we decided to, as a city, lead an effort to what we call the public infrastructure feasibility analysis. Understand it a little bit better. What would be the public infrastructure needs? What would be the private infrastructure needs for this site to develop to the community's vision? We got two grants from Business Oregon for this effort as well, because they see this as a prime site for employment land. One of the grants from Business Oregon was to invest in marketing and marketing the site so that we could also attract the type of development that we wanted to see. So we put all that together and we developed this project, which you're going to hear about tonight, the culmination of that. And the project was really 4 different components. To understand the public infrastructure, we really need to understand better the land use scenarios in a more refined nature than just the area plan. And so the first step was really working on what's the master plan look like from a land use perspective. Now, these are 3 properties that are privately owned, so it was important for us that the property owners were at the table, engaged, supportive of every decision-making milestone moving forward. And so they did participate. We met with them privately, we met with them publicly, and each step of the way, as decisions were being made, they were part of that decision-making process. Prior to that, they had tried to bring in a land use application for comp plan map amendment and zone map amendment, and we're not able to move that forward because they were not working with each other and collaborating on what it looked like. And so another effort of this planning was to bring them together so that we could, as a group of property owners, they could agree on the final plan for the area. I'm happy to say we met with them a week or 2 ago to have the conversation of, is this it? Are you comfortable? Are you supportive of what we're bringing forward to City Council and the Planning Commission, and will you sign off on this? And all 3 of them said, yes, we are very supportive of this. We will sign off on this, and we appreciate the fact that we were able to come together, work with the community, and land on a final project for this site that will work for their needs as well as the community needs. So we did the land use scenarios, then based on that we did infrastructure analysis. You're going to hear about that tonight. We have both the private side, which we call the on-site infrastructure. It's still public infrastructure, but what's required of development. And then we're also, part of this project is to look at the public needs in terms of bringing infrastructure to the site to serve development. You're going to hear tonight we still have some of that outstanding that we're working through, but we're close to the end of that as well. And then the other thing we heard from the community when we were talking about this during the 3-mile lane area planning public hearing process was concern about what it looks like. It's a large site. It's on the gateway to the community in terms of Highway 18. And we heard very distinctly from the community, they do not want just generic development to happen out there. So design and development standards was very important as well as part of this project. And that's a component of what you're going to hear about tonight as well. And then finally, the marketing piece. So 4 components coming together to sort of, I say, set the table for this site to move forward for private development. And so with that, I want to hand it off to our consultant team who will lead you through the final product that the staff and the consultant team put together with advice from a project advisory committee. The consultant team's led by Walker Macy, and you have Ken and Samya here tonight, who are the project leads for that. And then we had sub-consultants as well, who they will introduce to you as we go. As we work through each component of the presentation, there will be times when we will stop the presentation to ask you for questions relative to that component and discuss that a little further. We'll be managing the time to make sure we can get through all of it for you and give you enough time to deliberate each component, but I just wanted to share that's how we've set up the presentation for this evening.
Thank you, Heather. Good evening, Mayor Morris, City Councilors, and Planning Commissioners. My name is Ken Perry. I'm a principal and partner with Walker Macy. We're landscape architects and planners in Portland. And it's my sincere pleasure to be here tonight to talk to you and present the culmination of over a year's hard work on this project. Wanted to thank I hope I thanked the city when we were selected for this project a year ago. I'd like to thank you again for this opportunity over the past year. But I also really want to thank the city team because they've been an amazing group to collaborate with, especially Jody Christensen. She was just a fantastic, supportive project manager. Heather was always there and collaborating closely with us as well. And I also want to mention David Berniker and Noel Amaya, who were also important members of the team, as well as Jeff Hunsaker. It's been a team effort, and our team here that's presenting to you tonight includes my colleague Samya next to me, and Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning, who will talk to you about design and development standards. And then we have Todd Mobley, who's a traffic engineer with AKS now. He's going to talk about traffic. And then Brady Berry, who's a civil engineer who will focus on the infrastructure. So as Heather mentioned, this is the culmination of over a year of hard work. And we've had a number of sort of concurrent tasks that have looked at a complex array of issues with the project, including really getting a good understanding of existing conditions, looking at a series of draft and then refined scenarios, and then coming up with design and development standards and the master plan report that we're sharing with you tonight. Throughout this process, we worked closely with a PAC that included some members of the Planning Commission and all 3 owners of properties on the site, as well as other community representatives and city staff, of course. And they were really instrumental in giving us their thoughts on what this project should be, and then reviewing our draft work and helping us refine it. Similarly, we worked closely with the community, and we did quite a lot of community engagement, including a well-attended open house. There was over 100 people here in this room, and a really well-supported online surveys that we conducted as well. So we feel confident that the community's wishes and thoughts have been reflected in these plans. We've also been talking to you and to the Planning Commission throughout the process. So again, this has been over a year of work, and we're happy to be here to present the final result. So it's worth reminding you that there was this vision that was developed. There was a really strong vision right from the start that was put together by Heather and the city team. But this was refined and worked on with the PAC as well. I'm not going to read it fully, but we've bolded some of the key elements of the plan. This is all about fostering a place for high-wage employment opportunities, but it's also a place for the community, that there should be public spaces and open green spaces for people to gather. It's meant to look for the next generation of jobs and employers that might be attracted by such an opportunity to come to McMinnville, but also to support existing businesses in McMinnville that just can't find the right space to grow their companies. The notion is that this should be a thoughtful master plan site, not an incremental piecemeal development, but something that's considered carefully as a whole. And then there's also the important piece that Heather mentioned, the fact that there's a retail center that's helping to meet the city's gap and the leakage that's happening with people shopping in other communities. There's also some simple goals that we put together, again, with the PAC. And we list these, they're quite simple goals, but they're important touchstones that we've repeated at every meeting, and we hope they'll continue to be referred to by the PAC and other champions of the project as you go forward, because there was pretty clear acceptance of these as the guiding goals for the project. So in your packet, you received our full final draft master plan report. We're not going to page through every page with you tonight, but we've pulled out some excerpts just to give you the highlights. But we're happy to pause at several points in tonight's presentation and take any questions you might have. You may have read more fully into the report and have some detailed questions. But one of the first pages in the report is how to use the document. Our goal throughout the project has been to create a fairly concise and very usable document, because we're leaving this with Heather and her team, and they're going to be using it, but portions of it they can pull out for other uses. They can use this as the basis for a master plan, plan development overlay submittal that's going to happen very soon. I think the goal is December and maybe adoption early next year. So these pieces are elements that the city can pull out and use in the application, and it's also something that, as I mentioned, we've worked closely with the property owners. They can refer to these pieces and feel like their voice was reflected in there if they're going forward with specific development projects. There's also a lot of information that's included as attachments or appendices. So there's a detailed traffic memo, and there's also an infrastructure memo, and those are separate at the end of the master plan. And then aspects like all the details of our community engagement is included as an appendix, because that'll be important going forward, just to have a record of that extensive involvement. So we have pages that describe the process of the project. And again, this was a continuum, starting with the 3 Mile Lane area plan, which really set the stage for this project. This is sort of seen as the next step in that continuum, and there will be further steps after this that hopefully are building on some of the good work that's been done in this master plan. The process, as I showed with our schedule, included 7 key tasks. And again, it was sort of a little bit of overlap, but it was a linear process moving towards this draft master plan. I mentioned the engagement. I just wanted to emphasize that the input we heard from the public at open houses and in surveys, but also through the PAC and through your input as well, really led directly to shaping the plan and changing aspects of the plan. Maybe one of the most important things that we heard from the public was that they wanted a real focus on how this looks. What is this? This has an important place in your city, at the gateway to the city, and people were very concerned that this should look like a high-quality new neighborhood for your city and really serve as the gateway. We heard from owners who were really interested in having flexibility. They wanted clarity, but they also wanted flexibility, and we think we've achieved that in this plan. The overall vision that this project, building on that initial vision and the goals, the vision for this project and for the master plan is threefold. So there's, again, the notion of creating this campus for high-wage employment, attracting new companies and a variety of businesses, as well as helping existing businesses with places to grow. It's also a place for higher quality retail, which is serving that gap. And this is something that is inspired by some of the newer retail developments that you might have experienced around the state and around the country. One example that our PAC was really favoring was the Old Mill District in Bend. It wanted to see something that is more experiential and walkable and truly mixed use. It's not the old version of retail of a big box or an enclosed mall. Retail is changing. And then finally, the important piece that gets to some of the public input was the public realm. How is this all tied together with open spaces, with walkable streets, with trails, and other components that make it feel like it's welcoming to the people of McMinnville, as well as visitors. And those three elements, you can imagine them as a Venn diagram, and the McMinnville landing is right at the middle of all three elements. So this is the master plan. This is the plan for the project. And just to emphasize the simplicity and clarity, but also the flexibility, the red tones are the commercial retail areas, and that's primarily focused north of an east-west spine road that traverses the site. That spine road meets a north-south spine road that extends south as the extension of Cumulus from the existing interchange. Those two streets are the two streets that we've identified in the plan. Other streets are identified with arrows, and they're meant to be more flexible, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But generally, we think it's important to have a grid of streets that allows for the dispersal of traffic throughout the project, as well as opportunities for walking. So you've got the retail center north of that east-west spine street, and then most of the employment land is south of that east-west spine street. And then you can see the network of green spaces. We particularly like the opportunities of a green space on the southern edge. As if you've walked the site, it looks from the highway to be totally flat, but as you get to the south side, it starts to slope down to a creek and to the South Yamhill River. And that's a gorgeous space, and we think that's going to be a great place for a future open space. And there's this great opportunity to connect with a trail to the existing Galen McBee Airport Park. There's also other nodes of retail commercial development that are suggested. We think that the proximity to the medical center on the west edge has some opportunities for a specific kind of commercial uses. We've also identified, and we'll talk about this a little later, the potential for a new neighborhood park. This is something that your Parks and Open Space Plan has identified a need for to address some of the new housing that's been built recently. And there's good opportunity for locating that park in the western side of the planning area. So also mention that through our discussions with the owners, there was a real concern that there be a fair allocation of commercial land. And you'll see, we can mention that of the two major property owners, DRS Land and Kimco, they each have the same amount of commercial land on each of their properties. There's a third owner, Springs Living LLC, and they have 10 acres in the northeast corner. They also have a mix of commercial and employment land. So as we've been working through the process, we've been reminded that you have a great set of great neighborhood principles. And so we've tried to really keep those in mind as we've done our work. And you'll hear that from Elizabeth when she talks about the design and development standards. Those really guided how those were put together. And this illustration is meant to just show a cross-section of one way this project could be developed in future. But it emphasizes those great neighborhood principles evoked on the site. Integrating uses, mixing uses, having public gathering spaces, complementing the very unique landscape that this site finds itself in. And we've done a lot of work in trying to illustrate the potential for this site, and we've done some visionary examples of ways that we think this project could develop. So these are meant to be evocative. They will be used in the project's website. They can be used by the city in a variety of ways. And this is a demonstration of one way the project could develop. I wanted to mention, and it may not be fully visible, but there was a very influential member of the PAC, Beth Rankin, who sadly passed away recently. We wanted to honor her memory because she really had some great input into the plan. So if you look closely below the landing market, there's a sign for Beth's Cafe. So her vision lives on through the project. So I will pass it on to my colleague, Samia.
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to walk you all through a series of conceptual illustrations that are provided in the master plan. The intent of these is really our best shot at showing the aspirations that we heard from the PAC, from the community, from these bodies about what this development should really achieve in order to be consistent with community values. So one of the main pieces of the development, as many others have mentioned, is how it presents itself along Highway 18. That is the gateway moment. That is the way that this project represents itself to the broader community and to visitors. So part of what is important about that edge is that we create a generous landscape buffer and a setback of development from the highway, within which is included a multi-use path for walking and biking. The landscape of that buffer can include, potentially vines like the Evergreen campus across the street to create kind of a cohesive experience of entering the city along that corridor. Additionally, as someone is traveling along Highway 18, they will see really bold and unique gateway signage and welcome signage for the landing. They will see openings into the landscape of the campus that include plants that evoke the rural character of the region. And so what we're really trying to do with this edge is create a welcoming interface with the community. That also includes having buildings up against the highway as part of that. Another key component of the plan is a central gathering space in the heart of the retail town center that we're calling the Landing Commons. And this is a public gathering space of both plaza and softer landscapes that can be utilized for a variety of daily and, more larger public gatherings. This is directly in the center of the retail town center, so it's envisioned to be activated like a campus quad by all of the commercial buildings surrounding it. It's also envisioned to be located along that major east-west street that Ken mentioned, so that there's lots of good public visibility and access to the space. So you could imagine businesses really making best use of this space for seating, for cafes, for other uses, and creating kind of a buzz and a unique identity for this district. Across the street from the Landing Commons would be the employment district, and as we move further south, we've got an illustration of how that employment district can start to interface with the southern green space. So this will include a generous setback from the tree line from the creek itself. It can be a combination of some stormwater areas, stormwater plantings, and we're really looking for how the buildings in the employment side start to activate and face onto that green space. So can they have their kind of active spaces facing out and taking advantage of that? Part of this is there could be a small node of commercial use that's down at this edge, and that could provide a great opportunity. Okay, and then sustainability and resilience is also a key priority for the community. So the plan includes some encouragement about how to do that through development. A key component of this is safe and complete streets, so making sure everything is walkable and bikeable and well connected to the rest of the community, in addition to ensuring access for large vehicles for deliveries, for example, is possible. So we're balancing those priorities. One of the key pieces that we've discussed with you all before is the need for amenities like bike parking, mobility support, accessibility, so that's part of this. In terms of the architecture, we want to encourage sustainable materials, material reuse, natural daylighting, renewable energy to the extent possible. And then when we look at the site, stormwater treatment for water quality also creates a really nice, lush environment for everyone. Elizabeth is going to join us to talk about the design and development standards later, but this is just a quick snapshot of what's included in the report, where we mostly focus on what we heard from the community about what those standards should regulate. A lot of focus on the multi-use path in the Highway 18 buffer, creating really positive public spaces along the public sidewalks, making sure that that Landing Commons gathering space is really usable and inviting with shade and some unique elements. And then a major priority was breaking up larger parking areas where those exist with green connections for people to walk through so that the scale and impact of those spaces is reduced, and we're also creating a more walkable experience. Lastly, we also want to include native and climate adaptive landscapes that are consistent with the regional context, and architecture that represents the regional context. The master plan includes addressing the mixed use and commercial areas that are located on the site. Overall, this entire site is considered to be mixed use, although there are distinct commercial and employment areas. For example, in the commercial area, you could imagine a brewery that's a production brewery that also has a tasting room, for example. Whereas in the employment areas, you could see, a manufacturing facility that also has a little retail component to it. So none of these areas are super mutually exclusive, but there is a distinct focus on commercial in certain parts of the site. And if we move to the next page, we start to highlight some of those key opportunities. So in addition to the retail town center, we see an opportunity for a wellness village concept for the commercial that's located closer to the hospital. This could contain a mix of uses that support patients and families as well as the broader public. It also offers a great opportunity to activate that neighborhood park that Ken mentioned and really draw people into it from the nearby residential neighborhoods. Lastly, we do have a focus on the goals and recommendations for each of the public open spaces on the site. So that includes that buffer on the north side with the gateway signage and landscaping, the landing commons, and then the neighborhood park. And as Ken mentioned, this is a requirement from the city's Park and Recreation Open Space Plan. The specific site is to be determined, but we recommended a site here that's very connected and walkable to the existing residential on the west side. I will just wrap this up with a reminder that there is an entire awesome website for this project developed by our team members at Fine Branding and Marketing, and they worked with us and with the owners and the PAC to develop this really great brand identity and vision, so I encourage you all to check it out. And that concludes mine and Ken's portion of the presentation, where we really just covered the report, the illustrated report itself, and happy to pause for any questions and discussion before we move on to transportation.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. So any commissioners or counselors, questions, comments?
Mayor,
Thank you. Jessica, Counselor Payne.
my comment, I was a friend of Beth's, so just thank you for the insight and acknowledging her existence, and that she was a very community-oriented person. I have a question about the park, though. So I understand, the walkability. Is there going to be any parking for the park other than street parking?
So right now, we're only in the master plan level. We haven't gotten down to sort of the site development level. You'll find when we have the conversation with Elizabeth Decker with Jet Consulting, it will describe the different design and development standards that the developer would have to come in and meet and do a development site plan for it. So yes, there will be parking. We don't know where there will be parking. We haven't even gotten to that page yet. If you want to think of it, the area plan was sort of the 10,000 foot level. The master plan is kind of down at the between 2,500 and 5,000 foot level. And then Elizabeth is going to describe the process, but this is meant to be a plan development overlay that has the master plan and the design and development standards. So kind of think of it as similar to the Northeast Gateway District overlay that many of you are familiar with. And then when development comes in, they're going to have to come in as a plan development, so the second part of the plan development, with their site plan for a minimum of 5 acres or 10 acres, and that's when we'll get into the more details as to where are the streets located, where is the parking, where all that sort of site development piece.
Counselor Geary.
So the answer to that, the question about the parks have parking, that was talking about when the developer comes in to develop. Are you saying they're going to develop and build out the parks, or that would be us to plan and build out the parks?
That will be determined as we get closer to that. If you remember, there's policies in the comp plan that allow the city to decide how they want to move forward with the parks that are identified in the Parks Recreation Open Space Plan. The 3 Mile Lane area neighborhood park that's identified then there is identified for south of Highway 18. So when visiting with Parks and Rec, we talked about identifying it in this overall master plan, but the refinement of how is it built, who builds it, and where exactly is it located will come down the road as we work with developers when they're coming in for development on this. The other thing I would share is, because we've had these questions as well, is what's going to be publicly owned and what's going to be privately owned in this area. Most of it right now is contemplated to be privately owned, but with public access, except for the neighborhood park, which is in the PROS plan.
Okay.
Councilor Chenoweth?
Following up on Councilor Payne's question, you said 5 to 10 acres is the minimum size it requires in master planning?
Yeah, so I think Elizabeth might have slides on this, and I don't want to get in front of her. Is she here? Okay, do you have slides on this? Okay.
Okay, well, we can wait, thank you.
Yeah, but just to sort of prep it, this policy has already been adopted in the 3 Mile Lane area plan as to how that process will work and what's the minimum size for it.
So are you doing the design elements? Is that who's going to be, okay. Okay, perfect. Any other questions right now then? I can only see this far, so you're going to have to help me if there's anything down there.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're good then.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce Todd Mobley with Lancaster Mobley. Todd, if you want to take it away with your transportation analysis.
So Todd should be a panelist, yep.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I had to rejoin as a panelist, so I just want to make sure this is working here. Let me turn on my video. There we go. Good evening, I'm Todd Mobley with AKS Engineering, which is a recent development. My company, Lancaster Mobley, recently merged with AKS, one of our longtime partners. But the vast majority of the work on this project was under Lancaster Mobley, so that's what you'll see throughout the project materials. So first we'll talk a bit about the site and the street network and what that looks like. You've seen this before in other slides, but this feature the east-west spine of Stratus Avenue and the north-south spine that's Cumulus Avenue. Cumulus connects to Highway 18 at that signalized intersection that currently exists. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but that access to what is currently kind of an underutilized signalized intersection on the highway is a pretty key piece of the transportation system for this site. Oh, sorry. I got a couple more points on the prior slide. Thank you. So on the site plan, the dashed lines are local streets. Those are intended to have a lot of flexibility depending on how the site develops, but it will maintain that grid system of streets to allow some safe and efficient circulation through the project site. And I also wanted to note, before we get to the cross-section on the next slide, the network of trails and also the green corridors that'll have frontage along both of those spine roads. It really provides a nice network of trails and multi-use paths that really make this an attractive site, both for people that would work here and also visit. Okay. So here's a representative cross-section here of one of the two spine streets. You can see on the left side is an example with the green corridor, the shared use path, pretty wide buffer there. All the streets are two-way, but they also have on-street parking. On the other side of the street, this shows a protected bike lane, wide sidewalks with kind of pedestrian activated frontages on some of those buildings, especially in commercial areas. The city is going to soon update their transportation system plan. They'll probably get into more detail and work out some of those details on street sections, but this provides a good idea of how these streets are envisioned to look. So here we get into some of the details of the transportation analysis. Our task here was really to kind of start where the 3 Mile Lane area plan traffic analysis left off. We didn't want to get into sort of new land uses that might be construed as the TSP update. We really wanted to start with the 3 Mile Lane area plan, as this is a bit of a refinement of that. So we worked with ODOT and their transportation planning and analysis unit. We used their travel demand model that they maintain for McMinnville, and we looked at the areas in the site, and we made some different assumptions for job densities. We had a couple different densities, one for employment, one for commercial, and that ended up being just a bit over 2,100 jobs in the roughly 200 acres of the site. So using that model data and those increased trips, we applied those to the system, analyzed those intersections with the highway, and that's what you see here in the table is volume to capacity ratios on the right-hand side, level of service and delay to the left. And I won't wade into the details of that, but some of the findings were that the transportation system can accommodate the additional trips from this project by utilizing the existing at-grade intersections. The jug handles that were identified in the 3 Mile Lane area plan at the Cumulus highway intersection, we found really weren't needed. I think one of the key features here is to establish this good east-west connectivity south of the highway, so that people don't have to use the highway for those short distance trips. That combined with really capitalizing on what's some unused capacity at the Cumulus Highway 18 intersection, we found that that transportation system could accommodate those additional trips with some additional mitigation. It's on the next slide here. So this is really just a schematic intended to show generally what kind of lane configurations and modifications would be needed at the Highway 18 Cumulus intersection. You can see northbound, we'd have separate left and right turn lanes and a through lane, and then an eastbound right turn lane on Oregon 18, or on the highway. Really, we just kind of mirror the configuration that's already in place for the north leg of the intersection. We did note that first street intersection south of the highway might need to be limited to right turns in and out only, depending on what those queue lengths start to look like. And some future analysis really could determine that as these projects come online. There will be traffic impact studies with each site plan that's proposed. So similar to the rest of these plan elements, first 3 Mile Lane area plan was at a much higher level. We're a little bit lower than that, but the site plan applications will have their own traffic analysis that'll really get into the finer details. And I believe that's my last slide, right? Yeah.
If there's any questions for Todd.
Questions? Councilor Gary?
Yeah, a couple on the the 070J table where you have the VC ratios. So is this VC ratios measured up to 1.0 and Is that a universal standard of 1.0, or are you basing that off of McMinnville's currently adopted TSP, and so our 1.0 is unique to our transportation system plan?
Well, the V over C is volume to capacity, and you're right, 1.0 is kind of the upper limit, which would indicate it's at capacity. So how we calculate that and apply it is really agnostic to jurisdiction. But in that mobility target column, it does show city and ODOT performance standards. So for city intersections, we did use the city's adopted VC standard. The highway intersections, Highway 18 is an expressway, so those mobility standards are a little lower. But that's how we applied the VC. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think I heard in there that you used the city's adopted VC standards.
Yes. So it's,
Correct.
so the modeling is consistent across how transportation models VC ratios. It's then what there are policy decisions based on how much congestion an agency is willing to take on, and that's where you see the mobility target.
Understood.
And then the measurement is to that.
And our current TSP, 2010 TSP, is that a high tolerance for congestion or a low tolerance for congestion?
I would say it's on the higher side. I don't know what you say, Todd. 0.80 is a standard. You see a lot of places, 0.85. Mike Bissett, when he was here, visited with me and shared that the community made a decision to go a little bit higher than that to the 0.90 based on the cost of improvements. So your mobility target's going to show you what you're willing to absorb, and then once the VC ratio gets close to 0.90, you then have all these mitigation improvements you need to build. And I guess there was a discussion here locally that this list of mitigation improvements was costly, and so if we move the lever on the mobility target a little bit higher, that need for those improvements went down. That's what I understand.
So we're, as a whole, according to that TSP, okay with higher congestion?
Yeah. That was a policy decision made in 2010.
Okay. Thank you.
Also to answer your question, and Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is these were scenarios ran through the ODOT model for McMinnville, which was just recently updated. If you've heard us talk about how we worked with ODOT for a year to update what we call our TAZs, which is all these individual segments that hit the different roads, and they put it into a model at ODOT, and this was run through that new model. If I'm correct.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any additional questions? Okay, to move on.
Right. So in the theme of infrastructure, I'd like to pass it to Brady Berry with Atwell Engineering, and he's going to walk through his findings and recommendations for site infrastructure. And Brady, if you need to be added as a presenter, just let us know.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity to chat today. As part of the project, we went through and reviewed all the current infrastructure around the Innovation Campus, and also looked at what is available to the site and what is needed through the site. And Jeff will talk about that a little bit later on the public infrastructure needed outside of the development to serve the site. In concert with what we've been doing, the city has undertaken a master plan for wastewater. They've also been working with McMinnville Light in the water infrastructure needs. And with McMinnville Light, we've also discussed some of the power needs. What we looked at from the landing site was, okay, if there was enough capacity of all the infrastructure surrounding the property and to serve through and to the site, what would the kind of a backbone infrastructure look like to facilitate development and then kind of give a initial framework and some costs of what that could cost in the upfront. So on the first slide, Ken, what I've done is I've highlighted kind of that backbone system within the landing of what the infrastructure would be. The storm drainage, as they've discussed, there's opportunity for, we wanted to look at a regional development or regional stormwater treatment so that each of the individual parcels don't have to use a bunch of their land to treat the water and take care of it. And we were working, and what the team put together was some locations that would make sense from geographic as well as being able to be woven into the fabric of the open space within the site. We've got 2 basins. I think that from the city's perspective and in the infrastructure report, there may be an opportunity as the site grades out to maybe isolate it down in the south portion rather than over on the west, because there's some complications and with just out onto the farmland there. But the storm drainage essentially is broken up into 2 basins in the current stormwater master plan work. Next slide. From a sanitary sewer perspective, there are some challenges with serving the entire property gravity with the existing infrastructure in 3 Mile Lane. But through the master planning process, as Jeff will discuss later, there is some opportunity to, as the master plan has been finalized, looking at, okay, how can we avoid putting a new pump station in the landing and also take offline the existing pump station at the northwest corner of 3 Mile Lane and Cumulus. And so there's some opportunities that the overall best needs of the city and to serve this side of the city to and through the site may be some opportunities to assist with facilitating the capital improvements for the overall citywide master plan and also use as part of the infrastructure for the landing. But in general, the sanitary sewer will flow along these spine roads, come down and end up in a central location where, if need be, we'd have a pump station to serve the site, or it would hook into the greater system of gravity for the city. In the next slide. In terms of water, with McMinnville Water and Light, we just had some discussions on, okay, how do they want this to kind of come out in the backbone system? And it's going to be essentially a loop system to provide the best overall fire flow for the site and then serve the parcels in a logical manner. There are, again, some issues with the water in terms of fire flow, but I believe that those are also being addressed in the water master plan that is currently wrapping up as well. We anticipate a grid of about 12-inch pipes and smaller pipes, and then the developments will continue those through on the public infrastructure that comes through and finishes up the local streets. The next slide. In terms of power, that's one of the currently the power is something that McMinnville Light is looking at siting a new substation in this area to serve the east side of McMinnville. This is currently something that is in their planning process and was in the next 3 to 5 year horizon, and that's about a $7 to $10 million infrastructure need that will be funded by the McMinnville Light, and then but would be parsed out to the various developments as part of their cost of connecting to the system. There's some, as the Ken mentioned, we're trying to keep these roads very walkable and very urban looking with the streets there. So as the development matures, We'll need to look at and find places to put the electrical infrastructure that meets the needs to serve the site, as well as making sure that it doesn't plug up the infrastructure as well. And then power, or the communications would follow the power through the site and come out in this general location. But again, the siting of the substation has not come together fully at this point. And so in general, the site, the costs, when we look at strictly what the primary infrastructure needed to on the spine roads, the east-west and northwest spine road, we put some costs in there that talks about how they would come, you know, what is the time value of money for those. And then we also looked at what are some funding mechanisms through LIDs and different state funding, and different ideas of how, as a kickstart, those might be able to be funded prior to stimulate the development on the properties. And with that, I open it up to questions on the infrastructure.
Any questions?
So as a segue, excuse me, for Jeff, you'll note in the report, we have some placeholders in there for what we're calling the secondary infrastructure, which is the public infrastructure needed to get to the site, to serve the site. This primary infrastructure you just heard about is based on on-site development, what's going to happen within the site. We have a couple of master planning efforts that are still underway, which is good because this means we're going to have good data for this, good new data for this, but it is taking some time. And so I wanted to let Jeff share some of that with you. Our plan is to fill in the placeholders for the secondary infrastructure in the report before it's adopted.
I have one question. So urban design, so are we talking zero setbacks? Is that kind of?
You're going to hear about the
that's gonna
design
come
and
with you.
development
Okay.
standards in just
All right,
a minute.
ahead of it.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. So Jeff Hunsaker, Public Works Director. So I'm going to provide just a quick overview of the public infrastructure, specifically the sewer infrastructure needed off-site to help support this development. As Heather mentioned, we are currently working on our wastewater master plan. A big part of that effort is a new model for the system that projects out how it will react in certain events. And short of it is, in very extreme wet weather conditions, we are at or near capacity for some of the infrastructure in this area. Now we're very risk adverse in public infrastructure, so these are very extreme events I'm talking about, like 10-year storms when one of our 3 pumps are down kind of situation. But what it shows is that we do need to make some significant improvements in the area. But the good news is those are very manageable improvements as long as we're being smart about our phasing, looking at our funding strategies, and just coordinating real strongly with development and our other partners. So as Brady touched on briefly, our preferred methodology or preferred option for this would be to focus on a gravity system in the area. So trying to cut down on the amount of pump stations we have. This is to cut back on long-term operating costs and to simplify the system, less areas for it to have failures. So that strategy focuses on a larger gravity main that will go through the campus, in addition to some pump station upgrades downstream prior to the 3-mile lane bridge. And then even further down near our raw sewage pump station, we have some capacity improvements we need to make there. In the staff report that is attached in the packet that I wrote up, there's a conceptual 4-phase delivery plan that focuses on those downstream improvements that affect the entire city first, then pipeline improvements in the area and on the campus to support those early occupancies for development, then the pump station upgrades needed, and then just I&I reduction and other system improvements after that. Funding for these kind of projects can come from a variety of areas, including STCs or STC credits. Developers can put together LIDs or reimbursement districts. There's existing utility capital as well. And then, as Brady mentioned, there's state funds like state revolving funds and things like that, which are low interest funds that allow cities to get early capital to be able to build these things until the development dollars come through, like in SDCs. So finally, as we mentioned, the wastewater master plan is working on finalizing the scopes and costs for these different projects. We're going to be bringing those policy decisions to the council in early 2026, late this year as well. And really, we're just trying to develop a phased improvement that's going to ensure sewer capacity keeps pace with the development out here. It's going to take some cooperation, but nothing about it is freaking me out or anything. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions for Jeff right now? Counselor Gary?
Thanks, Jeff. On the report PDF, page 87 that we have, you state that the existing system can't properly handle it via gravity, the development. The property cannot be entirely served by existing gravity sewer system in Northeast 3 Mile Lane.
Well, yeah, there's two parts to that. As Brady mentioned, the site is sloping away from 3 Mile Lane, so it's going to need either a pump station on site or a much lower gravity system.
And then in that phased approach, that's where you were talking about how you would adjust the gravity to reset so you can fall the whole way?
Yes, that's the hope, is to be able to reset it to get it deeper and larger so that we can just fall the whole way, correct?
Yeah, and I would agree on gravity versus pump, but are those improvements in the wastewater's existing capital improvement plan, or would these be in addition to that?
So the existing wastewater capital plan is from the 2008 master plan, and it's very sparse. There's really only 2 conveyance projects noted in that capital plan. So we are currently developing the new CIP, and they will be in that new CIP that's part of the master plan that's going to come to council for adoption. And then the SDC methodology will incorporate those projects, and we'll update a new SDC methodology for reimbursement for those projects.
And then we talked a lot about gravity, but as far as just sort of size in the conveyance system and capacity, is that in existence too, or would, in addition to clearing up the issues with gravity and elevation, would you, if there were any issues in sort of a size, be able to clear that up then too?
Yes, we're at a point where we need to do some upsizing in the conveyance system, not just here, but other parts of the conveyance system too. That's just due to growth over time, deterioration of the system, so more and more stormwater gets in through the groundwater. And some of it's just older. The piping in this area and the pump station's 30 years old, so you can't really design sewers to last for the flows you would expect 100 years from now, because then the sewer wouldn't be self-cleaning. So you need it to be small enough that you get high enough flows so it cleans itself. Otherwise, you're going to have major maintenance issues. So you can only do these generational improvements for capacity, little jump ups here and there. I know that's kind of gross. Sorry, y'all.
No.
Good to know, though.
Yeah. And that includes what was done at the bridge recent in that improvement?
Yes, the pipeline across the bridge was upsized recently from a 12 to a 16 now.
Okay.
So it's twice the size of the old pipe. We can do the math later if you want, Zach.
It's diameters. Any other questions for Jeff? Okay, we can move on. Is it time for design standards?
I appreciate the enthusiasm with which you're ushering in this final segment of our presentation tonight. As Ken and Heather mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning, helping the team on the development and design standards to help implement the master plan for McMinnville Landing. So thank you, Mayor and Planning Commission Chair, members of Planning Commission and City Council for having me here tonight. Really excited to talk about all these pieces you're hearing and how that turns into some specifics and how those get applied to proposed future developments. in the hopes that it might not look exactly like Salmia's pictures, but that it takes inspiration from them, and that we create really the sandbox of tools where there's some strong parameters and guardrails of what the city's priorities are that we've heard through this process to make sure those are reflected. So when I set out to write these development standards, there were several things that were in the back of my mind to ensure that I can promise you that these draft code helps to implement. So certainly we're looking to implement this draft master plan, but even going back a little bit further, the 3 Mile Lane area plan has a few areas where it is actually more specific than the master plan, and so it's important that we carry those pieces forward and ensure that those are implemented through the code. I'm also looking at the broader, what are we at, Heather? 350 pages of the city's code, zoning code, and making sure that this will be consistent with the way that other types of development is regulated so that it can be implemented by staff, as well as comparing to other jurisdictions that have models we'd like to emulate, as well as emerging state models and best practices. So a wealth of different codes and standards and parameters that I'm drawing on in order to sort of stir it up into a soup that best can be served at Best Cafe here on the McMinnville Landing. So these code concepts, we started at the more conceptual level to review with the project advisory committee through an online open house and survey, as well as in discussions with the property owners and with city staff. And we took that feedback and helped refine that into draft standards themselves that have gone through a further round of review by city staff, the project advisory committee, planning commission, and then council here tonight, prior to turning it over to Heather to begin the legislative, to consider how the adoption process moves forward. So to give you, we've used this metaphor so much tonight, I'll use it in a slightly different context. To zoom out a little to the, whatever 1,000-foot level, wanted to start with just an outline of all the different topics that are covered in the proposed development and design standards. Don't worry, we will not go through these one by one. But just to give you the universe of everything that is covered, it's all the pieces that you would expect in a zoning district to be covered by development and design standards, as well as some additional ones that are specific to this area because of, say, for example, perimeter transitions. We heard how important that is on Highway 18, 3 Mile Lane, and then the southern open space. So particular standards there that are focused on that. The largest section by far is the design standards that we just summarized here, the main topics that are covered there. And I can say section 16 signage is the very shortest because that's already covered in an adopted ordinance for the entire 3 Mile Lane area. So that was a pretty easy cross-reference. But this is the overview. I'll talk about, rather than going through them, how the different pieces of those standards come together to help implement the pieces of the master plan that you've heard about tonight already. So you've seen some of these diagrams already tonight, so hopefully that'll help cue back the themes and the goals that we're trying to accomplish, and then give you some sense of how the development and design standards help to implement and really make these diagrams come into effect for the site. So the first decision that we made in consultation with City to work within the city's existing regulatory system was to move this, propose this as a new plan development overlay. That's a tool that the city has, as Heather mentioned. You've seen in the Northeast Gateway area and many other developments in the city. And so that is the tool that we propose to use for this site, defining the boundaries of this site as a plan development overlay, and then within it proposing 2 zones, the reddish tones, as Ken mentioned, for retail center. That's really based off of a lot of the uses permitted in the commercial C3 zone, and a little bit broader here too, to make sure that it includes things like office and medical office that allow for either wellness village, the overlap, and site suitability being right next to the medical center there. And then the blue defines the industrial district as the second zone, where it is based on the light industrial M1 zoning, but with a much tighter focus on employment uses that generate higher density of jobs, things like light manufacturing and office, rather than things like self-storage or refuse or those, warehousing yard, storage yard, those kinds of uses that don't have a high number of jobs associated with them. And then, picking up on the themes you've heard tonight, building out that multimodal circulation is really important. The development code is primarily focused on what happens on private property, and so a lot of those cross sections and the improvements within the public right-of-way will be handled through refinements in the city's TSP, but it will be part of the discussion when developers come forward, and so it's important to ensure that there are standards that point in the right directions to ensure that each component of the multimodal circulation plan, as envisioned in the master plan, is conceptualized and implemented through the development standards. So there are requirements for pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular circulation, pointing to, of course, the primary streets that you've already heard about tonight, and then a requirement for local streets, because they are, flexible in this plan right now. There's, the arrows to indicate general direction, a spacing standard of a maximum of 400 feet between them will make sure that the future development of those streets doesn't leave any gaps in the network. There's also an opportunity for private streets within developments on a larger site, what we're calling enhanced drive aisles that may cut through different parking areas and connect stores that way. That can also supplement the local street network. And then pulling in the green aspect of it with an off-street trail network and connections to the greenways, which will ensure that there's pedestrian connectivity throughout the site on the public realm, as well as on private sites to connect within a site between parking areas, entrances, and other key aspects of the site. Also, on the green side, the other infrastructure network that really underlies this district and that we heard so much about the importance of the parks and open space is ensuring that the standards address the variety of open spaces with, again, certainty and flexibility, right? That's the level, that's the name of the game here. And so really focus on, in the development standards, being specific about locations and about sizes of some of these facilities. But to some of the earlier questions, they are not specific to, exactly where does the parking go on this site. That's a site planning question for the neighborhood park or for, the future landing commons, and that'll come forward with site development proposals. So the code is really about making sure these spaces are reserved and that they are improved and integrated into future development plans. We had a question about setbacks, 0-foot setbacks, and so that ties into development standards to create building presence when we're talking about setting up these two core streets and really bringing a sense of place. That experiential retail that we heard was really important on this site. One of the things that's going to help create that sense of place and sense of being in a unique environment is bringing the buildings forward close to the streets. So a couple tools there, using maximum setbacks rather than a minimum setback. The maximum setback is 5 to 10 feet for the commercial and 20 feet for the industrial. And there are some provisions to increase that if you're adding something like a plaza space or some landscaping or on-street seating. But those are the exceptions if they are other public spaces that are being used along those key streets. And in addition to bringing the buildings up to the road, there's also a requirement to have sort of enough of a building that it is really creating that presence along the street. And so we get to that with standards that address the minimum percentage of frontage occupied by buildings. A little bit of a mouthful, but the idea just being that if you have 100 feet of street frontage, if you're on these key streets, Stratus and Cumulus, or fronting the Commons or the park, 60 feet of that 100 feet of frontage needs to be occupied by a building. So, there's really a there. And then the standard is 50 feet along some of the local streets, and then as a compromise also along Highway 18 and the south open space, knowing that there's additional landscaping and other screening tools that are also going to be present there. But that it's still important to balance, as it turns out, half buildings and half green space. Is how we got to those numbers. Also some additional emphasis where you see these red circles on the corner activation to really bring focus those buildings tightly on the corners. And then if you think about the photo negative, if we're talking about bringing the buildings forward, what you're not seeing is the parking, because the emphasis is on putting the parking to the rear and side of the site so that you can really create that building presence. As we've seen with the Highway 18 edge, we heard repeatedly throughout the project how important this is as a gateway to the site. So there are several development standards, as I mentioned, a special section in the development standards that address this transition area. First, by requiring a wide highway setback that allows room for that landscaping and a meandering multi-use pathway. This is one illustration of what could happen in that setback. Again, we heard the need for flexibility and certainty. So the certainty here is that there is landscaping required within that setback, and it needs to relate to the agricultural and viticultural history of the site. But the flexibility is that it does not necessarily have to be, exactly grapevines spaced on, however many feet apart. Maybe there's someone here who's an expert on that. It doesn't have to be exactly mimic the grape plantings on the other side of the highway. If there's a different way that the developer sees to bring that theme forward and illustrate it on this site, then other landscaping plans will also be considered. So landscaping and trail, huge piece of it, but also that building presence like we talked about for a minimum of 50% of that frontage to, again, create that presence, let people know, this is a substantial development. There's something here, there's something exciting, there's something that you want to be at. While leaving some breaks for view corridors to see into the site through buildings at key intervals. But screening visibility of anything like parking areas, trash, or utilities that might have a sight line from Highway 18, with a additional focus on the gateway features at Cumulus Avenue. As I mentioned, those sign standards for the 3-mile lane area already address what types of signs, and so it'll be a monument sign, not a pole sign in this area, as well as some additional plantings, landscaping, and architectural features to help create that sense of place. Moving down to the southern edge, equally important, some similar tools, but a slightly different focus because it's more of a natural area. So here, the development code is going to call upon some tools to create a setback from the riparian area that allows for that open space, as well as leaves rooms for that stormwater detention area that you saw on the infrastructure plan, allow space for that multi-use path, as well as landscaping with native and climate adaptive plants. And then addressing the built environment as it interfaces here through some decreased building heights so that the height steps down. It's a 65-foot limit within the rest of the industrial district, stepping down to 45 feet adjacent to this area. But keeping those buildings as part of the edge along 50% while screening parking and loading areas. Within the site on all of the main streets, particularly within the retail center area and the industrial development that's along the main streets. The emphasis that we heard is on the form and the form as it functions to interact. So we're calling this storefront design so that it's an engaging presence that includes physical features like a primary entrance oriented towards the street. You can have additional entrances that may face parking areas to serve additional customers, but it still needs that direct connection with the street. As well as a high percentage of transparency. Again, we're talking about 50 to 60% of the frontage being occupied by buildings, so it needs an equivalent amount of windows and doors to lighten that up. Create some pedestrian shelter with awnings or canopies, and then use a palette of high-quality materials that also reflects the agricultural and aviation and industrial characteristics of this area. And we heard substantial feedback about parking areas throughout this, that parking is an essential component to make the site function, but an equally important aspect of the site to get right so that it doesn't dominate the site. So when we first are approaching parking, the number one thing that we're thinking about is writing the standards that require parking to be located to the interior of the site, to the side, either to the side or rear of buildings. And then incorporating landscape and tree canopy coverage within parking areas that helps divide larger parking areas into smaller sort of parking pods, if you will, using drive aisles between them to create connectivity. So the examples on the right here are from Orenco Station and really show how those rows of trees create tree canopy, shading, but still allow connectivity between the different parking areas and to serve the individual buildings. So the overall amount of parking for this site, the regulations proposed are a little bit different than elsewhere in the city. So you're probably familiar with parking minimums, and it was also an important aspect of the 3-mile lane area plan to apply parking maximums on this site. So the city minimums are required, and then a maximum of 110% of the existing minimums are proposed for surface parking. That does leave open opportunities for things like shared parking, underground parking if someone wanted to dig it, or structured parking if a developer felt that that was better suited to the site. And then there's a little bit more flexibility about the total amount of parking if it's provided in those alternative configurations. On the other side, there's also opportunities to reduce the parking minimums, several different ways to do site-specific reductions, some that are automatic and some that are, really discretionary about the applicant explaining the particular mix of uses and the site. So looking to create some flexibility on both ends there. When we think about how the parking lots themselves are designed, once we arrive at the total number of spaces that are trying to be fit onto the site, the key is really about, dividing up large parking areas so that it's not an undifferentiated sea of asphalt, that it's really about these smaller parking areas defined by what I mentioned, the enhanced drive aisles, which, really mimic a lot of the features of a local street, with things like sidewalks and landscaping, as well as travel lanes. Using perimeter landscaping to screen along the edges, and then interior landscaping located either as islands or rows of landscaping, so that it divides the parking into clusters of no more than 20 contiguous spaces. So this is one parking lot example where the trees haven't grown in yet, so you can't see all the great tree canopy that's going to be on the site, but it does do a good job, sort of in the early growth phase, shall we say, of seeing just sort of how those landscaping areas are going to help break up the spaces. And the standard that will be applied is a minimum of 30% tree canopy coverage proposed in the development standards that comes from a new state best practice. And then a final aspect of the standards to talk about tonight is how the standards address large format uses. We heard significant feedback from the community about many aspects of large format uses, both how they could be useful to certain members of the community, how they could fill certain retail needs in the community, but also concerns about what they might look like, how they might function on the site, noise, traffic, other kinds of concerns. And so the approach that we took is to really ensure that all of the principles we've just been talking about for the site are also applied to large format uses. That the city and the community, the project advisory committee specific to this project, has expressed what their priorities are, and that those priorities need to be applied to all tenants that may come to this site. And so the standards the one piece that's specific about large format is to set a maximum of how many large stores could be located on the site, what we're terming anchor stores. So any store over 135,000 square feet, there would be a limit of no more than 2 stores over that size threshold. There's no minimum number. There's no requirement for anchor stores or large format uses on this site, but there is a maximum being proposed in the code. And planning commissioners may recall that we came to you last month and talked about an option for a third. We did some site testing and some site fits, looking at the range of uses and ideas on this site, and really felt that there wasn't room for a third and that wasn't appropriate and in line with the other goals for this site. So the proposal has been refined to a maximum of 2. Heather can jump in here if you want to talk a little bit about the background of how we arrived at the 135,000 square foot threshold, but that's based on some earlier 3-mile lane area plan work.
Yeah, so we did provide to you the attachment about retail size that we did during the 3-mile lane area plan public hearing process when this came up, to understand, one, what's in McMinnville in terms of sizes, two, what's in other communities, and then three, what are the types of products that go into these different size of stores. So we heard the need for grocery. We also knew from our market analysis that for standalone grocery stores and square footage, we're actually over what the demographics usually would call for. And so in discussions with developers, we heard that if you really want a grocery store out in this area, it's probably going to be combined with something else, general merchandise or something of that nature. And so going through the discussion of trying to understand community needs and community concerns about size, how could we come to the middle ground of that so that we're not eliminating the opportunity, but we're managing the impact. And so the 135,000 was chosen because it is larger than a standalone grocery store. It's smaller than your superstores that you kind of think about, but it's sized enough that it would attract a smaller general merchandise grocery store combination. And the attachment that you have in there reflects that. And so coming out of that 3 Mile Lane area planning public hearing process, that was one of the conclusions from that process. Now, that particular number was not embedded in the 3 Mile Lane area plan as a policy. It was something that we said we would continue to talk about and bring forward, but that's after about 3 different public hearings where we talked about this at the city council level and heard the public testimony, this is where we landed.
Do you have a question? Okay, go right ahead.
So, with our last planning commission meeting, the majority of us were concerned about a maximum size, and we understood that we would have a maximum of 2 anchor stores over 135. Is there a maximum size so that we don't get a super Walmart, which is what divided the community 20 years ago, which is around 260,000 square feet? We need to have a maximum, so I have no problem, I mean, I do have a problem, but it is what it is to have 2 135,000 square foot. But an average Costco is 147, and the Juneau Costco is 76. But I do think that a super Walmart would just take over that whole property and completely wreck the concept of what we're trying to do. So I really would like to see a maximum size. So if you've got a maximum of 2 anchor stores over, if you want to double that up, no more than 270 square feet total, that would be acceptable. Because then that gives some flexibility. If there's a Costco and then a Trader Joe's, or a Costco and a Fred Meyer, that gives some flexibility. But I am really nervous about having no maximum whatsoever.
I guess my recommendation would be is if the community wants a maximum size, let's discuss that and put it into the code. My concern would be no maximum of 2 stores of a combination of square footage, and here's why. We spent a lot of time with the property owners in discussion to make sure there was equity in terms of how this development developed over those properties. And if we get to a place where we're saying you can have 2 stores that max out to 270,000 square feet, then we're in the tug of war of who gets what. So one property owner comes in with a developer that absorbs, I don't know, a majority of that 270, and then the other property owners left with less. So that's why the discussion, it's intended that the anchors are sort of bookends on the development, and that's, if you look at the design and development standards, they're written in such a way which is going to create that sort of linear look and not the pad look that you will see at like a Kaiser Station or something like that. So it is intended that it will be bookended by these anchor stores, and we want to make sure that however we write the code, we're writing it in such a way that we can work with the property owners to come in and develop the site in an equitable manner, if that makes sense.
I recognize the need to be flexible with the owners. My concern is if we do not have a maximum size, then our whole concept is toast.
Yeah, the maximum size is a policy decision for this group to make. I'm just saying, as someone who's an implementer of the code working with developers, I think if the concern is tenancy at a maximum size, let's discuss that and put it into the code. But creating a formula of what that tenancy at certain sizes looks like is more complicated for us in terms of the implementers. That's what I'm
No,
suggesting.
that's fine. I was just trying to come up with a way that was equitable for the owners, but at the same time preserved the design standards and the master plan that we have been working so hard with, and so many of our citizens have been working so hard with. And if you put in a super Walmart here and then a monster something else over there, that completely defeats the whole purpose of all of our meetings.
Well, I guess I would say two things, and this is what we talked about when it went through the city council public hearing process. When you're talking about large format retail, there's two discussions. One is size of the tenant, which is what's happening inside the building. The other one is design of the building, right? And people are reacting to one or the other or both. Design of the building, we can control with the regulations and standards. So we can put together regulations where you will never know what the size of the tenancy is inside that building. It could look like a row of storefronts. If the concern is design and what it looks like from the exterior. If the concern is the size of the tenant and the impact of that size of the tenant on other things and dynamics in the community, that's a different discussion, and that's when we're talking about the maximum size of the tenant.
And I think both of those are concerns to our citizens. And we've got the 3rd Street business owners and other small business owners that are very concerned about what will be put in if we have a maximum.
Yeah. I just want to make sure people are clear that the design standards are written in such a way that we won't see a big box. So in fact, we deliberately don't have any discussion about big box. So big box stores came around because originally when these large format retailers were built, they were built as big boxes. Now there's design standards in place and they can be built in a variety of ways, and you wouldn't know what's behind it. But the tenancy, the size of the tenancy is the other issue that I hear being discussed, and that's the discussion right here, which is the 2/135 discussion.
Counselor Chenoweth?
Are we opening up now for questions over this section, or should I be waiting till we get to the end of the section?
You need to wait
Thank you.
one moment.
All right, this is the slide that I promised you earlier, so hopefully this is helpful and helps pull together all the different threads that we've talked about tonight. Is what do you do now? You've got this master plan, some proposed development standards for the plan development overlay, but thinking ahead to how it gets developed, I just wanted to outline the different pathways that these standards will be implemented. So both the master plan and the plan development overlay would both go through a legislative adoption process that would come back before both of your bodies to consider all of the policy issues within it. And then after those two pieces were adopted, it would then be up to the applicants to make a submittal that, I don't know, what are we at, the ground level, I think. We're down to ground level for applicants to submit for an area, a minimum of 5 acres in the commercial area, a minimum of 10 acres in the industrial district. That's called a plan development, which is confusing, but that's the local nomenclature. Think of it like a site plan. That would come to Planning Commission as a Type 3 review, and it would propose how some of these, all these different standards would be met and how it would apply on the site, precisely where those local roads are going to be, how those green spaces are going to be developed, what kind of agricultural landscaping you're doing along Highway 18, et cetera. So that would come forward as a site plan, and then the individual buildings would come forward through the 3 Mile Lane design review process that is already established for the broader 3 Mile Lane area. And that either goes to staff for a review with public comment as a Type 2, or we built in a process in the proposed development and design standards. If applicants want to propose alternative building design standards that don't meet the clear and objective standards in the code, there's an alternative pathway to meet the overall purpose, and then that would come to Planning Commission for a Type 3 review for your interpretation of those discretionary standards. That's all I've got.
I just want to clarify really quickly, because that's planning lingo. So what you will see next is a plan development overlay that comes to you through a city legislative process. So that what that means, it goes to Planning Commission for public hearing. They vet it in a public hearing process, make a recommendation to City Council. City Council considers that recommendation and takes action, adopt or amend or deny. That overlay will have the master plan in it with all that you just saw. So it has all those policies and standards in it, the infrastructure information, the land use map, and then it will also have the design and development standards. So it's kind of creating a zone for that site, as well as, it's creating a zone, but more refined zone for that site. Then, when the properties are ready to be developed, the developer will come in with a plan development, which you're used to seeing, which is sort of a site plan for how they want to build out that area. We don't expect all 200 acres to come in, because we don't also don't expect all 200 acres to be built at once, right? So this allows the incremental phasing of that development. When it comes in, the developer will come in with that site plan. That will go to Planning Commission for review. So it will be a public hearing, and it will happen at Planning Commission, and they'll make a final decision. That can be appealed to City Council, but the final decisions at Planning Commission, that's already a built-in policy in the 3 Mile Lane area plan, that process. And the reason for that is because that plan development is intended to meet all these policies that you're seeing in front of you today that will be adopted as the plan development overlay. And so they'll have their site plan, and then as they want to individually build out buildings in that site plan, that then comes in as a building permit to the city. We review it, and we review the design of those buildings through these clear and objective standards that are in the code that say, if you do these things, you meet the code and you can build. That's an administrative review through the 3 Mile Lane design review process. But if they want to do something different than what's in the design, the clear and objective standards, there's a path for that, and that would go to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission would make that decision. And the premise behind that is, if you as a group adopt clear and objective standards that just say you meet the checklist, staff can review it meets the checklist. But if there needs to be discretion made about an alternative, we want to do something else, we think it's better, we want you to consider it, it's better to do that in a public meeting with a body of people representing your community, and it's just not one decision maker, right? And so that's those two different paths and why that's set up. The reason, and that threads the needle of the clarity and the flexibility. So the clarity is you've made the policy decisions. That's what this work is, and that's what the plan development overlay is, and that's what the developer wants to know. Okay, the city's ready to move forward with this land use scenario. They've said what the design and development standards are. They've said what their policies are. Now I just need to, design into that. And then the plan development comes into Planning Commission, because there's a lot of concerns about how this site will be developed. It's very public, it's gateway. So there's still public review of how it's going to be developed on the 5 and 10 acre and plus level. But when they want to actually build their building, they just come in for building permit review and administrative review if they're meeting all the other tests. So it gives them the clarity they need, it gives them the flexibility they need, but it also gives the public the opportunity to participate in the discussion at the different points.
Heather, you always have a lot, but it's good. Scylla.
Sorry. Apologies for being late. I was on Planning Commission scheduling, not the scheduling. So just for some clarification, tonight's is an opportunity to adjust the master plan should we feel that necessary.
I would say tonight's an opportunity. So we're presenting what came out of this year-long process. I think if we want you to give us policy direction of we like it or we don't like it, I would say tonight's the opportunity for us to hear that as a body. And this is what I'm going to say to the mayor and the chair. There are individual opinions that ran the gamut on this project. It's representative of the community as well. There's individual opinions that run the gamut. We, as a team that's putting together and trying to respond to what we're hearing, want to hear the consensus policy we're being asked to do. We can't sit down and write down everybody's individual wants and needs. We want to know what you as a body want us to do. And that's sort of the distinction. But yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Chenoweth?
If everybody else doesn't, I was on the PAC for the last year plus, so if everybody else has got their questions in, they'll go. If not.
I just have a couple.
So
want me to go?
I will defer to others since I've been
Okay.
able to comment up to this, but make sure you hit me at the end.
So I don't know, I may have missed it, but specifically, are there design standards for planting and all of that on the sidewalks? Because I know that was part of the survey that went out. So, I mean, I see parking and tree canopy, but on the survey there was, do you like this sidewalk? Do you like that sidewalk? And this is where the plants would be, this is where the path would be. Are there standards, or were those just, it was online survey? Oh, you don't.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I do know the survey you're talking about.
Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out, are those, people voted? And so are those specific standards in here, or are there just guidelines as to, how far are we?
So the attachment, what number is that attachment? Attachment in your packet, that is attachment 5, it starts at page 155. That is design and development standards for private property development, not the public right-of-way.
Okay,
I think the survey that you were given, where it had those sort of preference choices for that particular sidewalk delineation, is what was the information that was used for that cut section that you saw that Todd provided you of what the public right-of-way would look like, of the sidewalks and the width of the sidewalks and landscape strips.
but it's not specific of what's going to be there, it's just we want plantings.
Yes.
Is that
So,
correct?
yes, exactly. As we move forward, those are how the public right-of-way is planted. We currently have some minimum standards in our street and landscaping code, and we also have right-of-way specifications. As we go through the TSP process, as Todd indicated, if we want a standard in this area that's different than in other areas. So right now, our local collector street section looks a little bit different than what Todd showed you there. And if we decide, yes, we want that in this particular area to support this development, in the TSP, we will adopt a cross-section for this particular area for development here.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, just on the survey, one thing, just as taking it was nice to have all the pictures and be able to give feedback, but not knowing if it was going to be a set design standard or not, and would there be no fiscal dollars to it, like here we're going to apply this to these private developers and give them this standard, but we're just looking at it because it's pretty. How much is it really going to cost? And is that fiscally responsible?
Yeah.
So that's my concern there. I know I read in there about Water and Light needs to finish their part in this.
Yeah.
And that's my concern with the zero setbacks is, are we going to be okay with all of our utilities? I know there's a lot underground, but there's a lot of things to go out there when you think of raw water, sewer, storm, fiber. So, and when will those plans be done? I know they're in the works.
So
Jeff, do you know?
both the vendor for the water master plan and the wastewater master plan is the same vendor, same engineering firm. And so both of them have been directed to focus on the infrastructure needed to serve this site first as they're working through the master planning. The master plan will not be done by the time we adopt this report. However, we're confident that we'll get information about how to serve this particular area so that we can put it in concept form into the report to adopt it before you adopt the master plan for the whole city. And that's being considered for both the water master plan and the wastewater master plan. Now, the details that you're talking about, yes, John has expressed those same concerns. He expressed them to us as part of the technical advisory committee of this work. And one of the things we talked about was, let's look at how other areas that have this same setback. So we heard from the community that they do not want a large format retail vehicular oriented development out there. They wanted a more pedestrian development, and that's an adopted policy in the 3 Mile Lane area plan. So to do that, there is setbacks that we're looking at for that very issue. We've had a discussion of how are other communities building that way and having the same infrastructure serving those properties Where are they located? How is it designed? Let's learn more about that. That specificity hasn't been decided, and I don't think it will be decided as part of this report effort either.
Okay, but it's on the radar and going.
I will tell you, John has brought it up, yes.
I'm sure he has.
I don't know if he's here tonight, but yes, he has brought that up.
And then my other question, sorry, Chris, I have a few, but you told me I could, is just when will the city know what they're responsible for? So when we talk about the park, when we talk about the greenway, when we talk about, those areas, will that come before the council, or how will that be as to what we will be taking on or be asked to take on or get to choose to take on?
The only thing I think that's in the pros plan that's in this area, except for the South Yamhill Trail, I was looking for that, is that neighborhood park that's there. So you identified in a public facility plan the intent to do this public amenity, right? And you have you will have an SDC methodology to support that vision and effort sometime down the road. And so that's the only thing that's been described as public. Now, there's also in the comprehensive plan a policy that says the city can decide that they're actually not going to provide that public amenity for the following reasons, and there's this way to review it to sort of say, no, we're not doing that neighborhood park there. The other open space amenities that are described in the master plan is open space that we would require of development that they would need to build and maintain.
Well, I know in our last meeting, though, that area by the river, down by, you weren't sure whose was going to be responsible for that.
Right, and that's the South River Yamhill Trail, which is identified in language in the, are you looking up the pros plan, Councilor Geary? But that would be something, if we have an identified project in an adopted public plan, and we have a CIP list, so a list of projects that we're going to build and the costs associated with them, and then we do SDCs and say, you developer need to pay SDCs to help pay for this list, then if it's on that list, that's something that we need to have a discussion about in terms of that being a public amenity. That's the one I wasn't sure about.
Okay, and so that will come back when it gets to that.
Oh, so now I'm thinking through my head, though. The SDC methodology will come back to you, yes. Okay. I think there's an intention to look at the park's SDC methodology to support the pros plan here in the future. But the way the process is set up right now, you would adopt the policy piece, and then the plan development piece would go to the Planning Commission for final review. Now, based on you adopt an SDC methodology to support the pros plan and that project's removed from it, then I think based on the comp plan policy that the city adopted, which allows the park and rec director to remove any of the park's amenities from development if they choose to do so. And that's not done, that's done at an administrative level. And so the city could do that if they feel like they couldn't support the neighborhood park or the South River Yamhill Trail. Or if the SDC methodology instructs staff that these are public amenities that we will support, then staff will be doing that work when it comes in for review, and that's brought into the Planning Commission level. But that plan development piece, based on the 3 Mile Lane area plan policy, stops at the Planning Commission unless it's appealed to City Council. So I want to make sure you understand, you won't see that piece.
So I just, I understand the SDCs and purchasing and having it's the maintenance part, the cost part to the budget.
Right, and the maintenance
I'm
part is,
concerned about.
so in the pros plan, when the city went through the process of adopting it, there's a table of decision-making factors that directs the park and rec director to sort of go through that. We have a comp plan policy that responds to that. This says, if based on these factors, the city can't take on this public amenity that we identified in the plan, we have the option to not do it.
Right.
As a public park.
And I think we have to get back to that too, because there was a amendment or something that we wanted to do because of the authority to the park and rec director. Adam, put that on your list that we need to talk about, just to review that.
Okay. But right now that exists, and that exists for that very purpose, which is The city can't maintain the park, so we can't bring it online at this point in time.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. I appreciate it. Anybody else before Councilor Chenoweth? Councilor Peralta?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to your team for the level of detail that you provided in the report. Just anecdotally, I did a Google search for estimates of retail sizes because I just don't know that. Your document was the first one that came up on Google, so.
Actually, no, that's bad.
So I had a couple of questions. The first is kind of minor, but the stormwater runoff field that you have envisioned, is that a permanent retention pond or is it more of a temporary wetland?
So our current requirements would be that you would have to have a detention pond for runoff, but the property that's downstream of that is our property, the city's property, and you can directly outfall to the Yamhill River without requiring any detention. So there is a situation where the city could work with the developer to go across our property through an easement and avoid having to have detention altogether. But that's based on the current stormwater regulations that we have.
Okay. I mean, it seems like a large section of space for that purpose, and it seems like that would have a visual impact. Do we have a design for what that would look like?
No, not currently, and I agree, it is pretty large, and frankly, I don't really want a pond in that general location, if at all possible, especially a retention pond, because it's near the alignment of the existing runway, and birds and planes don't go together. So that's something that was noted with the development, and we'd like to be able to avoid it, but that's going to take further partnership.
Okay, so that's a concern. The second questions, it's more of a set of questions. So when we were originally presented with this project, the two comparators that I can remember were Tannisbourne and Ben's Old Mill District. And I can't remember, do either of those districts have any retail larger than 100,000 square feet?
The anchor at Old Mill District, I believe, is the REI, and I'm just not sure if it's close to 100,000. I just don't know the specifics.
Thank you. I mean, the reason I ask that is that it seems to me that Chair Winfield's concern about the scale of the two proposed buildings is significant. And given that we were kind of focusing on, at least in my mind, I had this looking like Tannisbourne or Ben's Old Mill District. I heard Ben mention again tonight. Can you point me to any examples of current malls with the kind of large format retail that you're considering that are similar in terms of the design standards that you have in mind here?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, Counselor, because it's an excellent question. I don't mean it's comical, but I was in the Seattle area in Renton, I believe, southern side of Lake Washington, and I was driving down the street with my friend, and I saw this development that's called The Landing, and I was like, stop the car. We have to go.
This is after we chose our name.
Yeah, we had already chosen the name, and I was like, but I have The Landing. Like, that's my project. How did someone build this? So I made my friend stop and tour this entire site. I'd be happy to send you some photos, but it did include a Target that was of a similar size to these large format stores that we're talking about. And, you know, it did bookend the site, as Heather was mentioning. It was sort of in one corner of the site, but it was also integrated, and it had additional smaller shops with very similar design standards. You know, my friend is not an urban planner, but I was walking down the street, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this community gathering space and these entrances and these awnings. And so I would be happy to send along those photos to you. But yes, that's the example that comes to mind immediately.
I would also say, Counselor, yes, in many urban environments, obviously you have bookend large anchor stores on zero property setback, blocks of streets in terms of the size of the stores and then what's in between them. I think what I would suggest is the retail center is meant to meet several different needs. And so I guess my caution would be, I think we all jump to sort of what our fears are, and maybe we talk about what we're trying to achieve and how to mitigate those fears, right? So if one of the things that we're trying to achieve is to meet the community's need of retail leakage, which we showed, and I can bring that back to a future meeting, the credit card data that we collected that showed how many households were shopping where and when, and the demographics associated with those households, we have a lot of families who have to leave town to access merchandise. And so, in terms of good planning principles, you don't want to send people 35 miles down the road to access, what would be considered general merchandise. The other question would be we were struggling with is we can't say, interestingly, even though on social media we're often told we can do this, which tenant is going in which building, right? We're not leasing these buildings. So if we want to try to make it as attractive as possible, which is what our regulations are doing, they're incentivizing some things and disincentivizing other things. If we want to make it as attractive as possible to attract grocery store into that area, what does it look like? And we met with developers, we did the market analysis, and from that process, we learned that standalone groceries are not going to locate there. We have a lot of square footage of standalone grocery in McMinnville. Maybe someone would, but that's, forecasting, that's what we heard. And so if we want grocery in that area, it would need to partner with the general merchandise need as well, which is a larger store than 55,000 square feet. That's why that retail memo was put out. So it's finding sort of that magic place in between of need, fear, and what we're trying to achieve in this area, and how our regulatory framework can both incentivize what we want to achieve and disincentivize what our fear is.
I really appreciate that, Heather, and I definitely understand where you're coming from. I guess I'm not really coming from a place of fear more so much as just expectation. Like when I travel around and look at retail outlet type places, when I see one large thing, you don't usually see like this really wonderful mix that you're describing, and my belief is that we're much more likely to see a few large retail and not much of the other stuff that we thought we might be getting with this. And that's, I don't know if maybe that is a fear, but that's a concern, and I think Chair Winfield's point on that is well taken. If we can't come up with really any examples of the type of mall that we're wanting to have with 135,000 square foot and a 170,000 square foot unit, I just, that's where my concerns are coming from. But on balance, I really appreciate the work. I think you've done an excellent job. And I think it's just a matter of considering these sort of fine points on how what we agree to and approve is going to affect the community.
Anyone else before we go to Councilor Chenoweth? Sella?
This might be a detail that is 5,000 square feet or 5,000 feet as opposed to where we are now. But I seem to have missed this in the prior meetings that we have allowed, let's see, it's in section E, additional use standards. We are allowing up to, it doesn't actually say that, I think, 4 potential drive-throughs. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, as a component of the overall use.
Okay. Yeah, is a gas, no. A gas station's not a drive-through because the gas station is listed as an acceptable use, isn't it?
Correct. We had a discussion around gas stations, and I guess, again, also to, community needs and planning for those. We left open the potential for a gas station to locate on this site, as well as electric vehicle charging, but listed those as a conditional use, so that it requires some additional use to make sure that the traffic queuing and some other aspects of the site were adequately addressed.
And how did we get to 4 drive-throughs?
Thank you for that excellent question. I would say that is also a policy question that you could have some further analysis on, but we were really also guided by the sense of balancing between different property owners, making sure that there was an opportunity for each of the 3 property owners to at least have one if they chose to do so, and then one additional for flexibility. We also spoke with property owners about that. They felt pretty comfortable with that threshold, so that's how we settled on 4.
Just a tangent. Is this the way this property is with the multiple property owners, and it's presenting some challenges? There's some interesting puzzles to navigate with in terms of design. Is this normal? Are many of these other places one large property owner?
I would say it's probably, and Ken and Elizabeth probably working on the private side probably see this more, but in my experience, it is, when you're master planning a property, it is usually controlled by fewer than more. And the easiest one is singular control.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, in this regard, I would say the 3 property owners, probably like a third of the way through the process, started operating more together than not.
Yes.
In terms of how they were collaborating with each other, the different skill sets they brought to the table. It was interesting to watch that interplay. So, Kimco is a large developer. So when these products were being formed, they were being farmed through that development team for comments, right? And then In Spring Living has does their own developments and has their own design lead who served on our group that was advising us, and so they have that sort of more intimate design piece, and they were bringing that aspect to the table. And then the DRS property was really thinking through, what does this mean in terms of the sort of layman business side of things, right? And they would bounce off of each other that way.
Okay.
So I think when we're talking about, I would say, if there's things in here like you don't think 4 drive-throughs make sense and you'd like to have less, yes, that's the discussion that you should be having. I guess, again, I would always say, when we're threading the needle of clarity and flexibility, right? If there is hey, let's make it clear that you can do this much, and if you want to do more, it's a conditional use permit, because that might be a special situation and it goes into a public review body for further dialogue.
So that's an option that we could add in, we could write into it, potentially.
I think so. I have never seen it where it says you can have this many of this land use, and then when you go over that many, you go into a conditional use process.
It's either yes or no.
But you could do that for your larger tenants if you want to do that type of thing. I would say what makes, so we also, the other part of this process is we interviewed 4 or 5 developers who developed these types of projects, because we wanted to understand, there's one thing to have your wish list, and there's another thing to understand what's the market responding to. We could write regulations that design, what everyone's own personal Disneyland, but if nobody's going to come in and build it, it means nothing, because you're not actually achieving it. So we talked to developers midway through the process as a checkpoint, to just sort of say, hey, we have this site, this is what we're thinking of, these are the conversations we're having, what do you think? Where is it too far? Where is it attractive to you? And these were developers that our consultant team had relationships with, who have developed these types of projects elsewhere. It was interesting, because I thought they responded in such a way where One said, because we heard a lot about don't ask for too many amenities like trail networks and open space. Just let people build what they need to build with the building and the parking and stuff like that. And what we heard from these developers is those amenities are important moving forward. New development wants that in terms of being able to attract jobs and employees, and we're hearing that from some of our businesses here in town right now too. And then the commercial side, we also heard from them, don't ratchet it. Find the balance there where we can get the tenants to be able to build the product, so we can bring the infrastructure in to support the employment behind it. So find a balance in there. But it was interesting to me because they were supportive of the vision and the standards to a certain point. If that makes sense. I think that reflects that.
Thank you.
Councilor Chenoweth.
Thank you, Mayor. So my understanding is you're wanting consensus opinions out of this conversation?
I'm sorry.
My understanding is you're wanting consensus opinions out of this conversation?
Kind of, and Ken just reminded me of why I actually started my rambling prior to that, which is what we heard from the developers. So to get back to the, you make things conditional uses, was they want some certainty. So the nervousness of any developer is going into a discretionary decision-making process. And any body of people represents a discretionary decision-making process to them. Because based on what those 6, 7, 8, 9 people are personally thinking, their development hinges on that decision. And if it's just sort of a staff decision with code and doesn't meet it or not, that feels more certain to them. So yes, I forgot all about that. So there's also finding that balance of, how do we give some sort of security to developers that if you put a lot of time and money into the site plan and working with tenants and you bring that product in, if it meets the vision and the policies, you'll be able to move forward. So now ask me a question.
Are you looking for kind of
We have a
consensus ideas? Is this the point to make changes and with consensus ideas?
We are at a final draft on this product.
Okay, so then I would throw my support behind a maximum size. I'll just say that right now. I don't know what that maximum size would be, so don't ask me. But I would support it because I don't know what retail sizing looks like. So to be fair, I don't know what I would be wanting for a maximum size because I don't know at what I'm trying to, where that top threshold is that I don't want to see happening. You throw a number out there, it really literally means nothing to me. So sorry to say.
Except you have a great memo that comes up on Google search in your packet.
Yeah, I know it's just not, that's not my bailiwick. So I'll throw my weight behind that, and if we can get to a number, then I'm great. Second thing is, can you talk to me a little bit about the parking? I was a little shocked to see it come forward in the pack, and it's still shocked to see it now that we're putting a maximum on the parking rather than minimums on commercial space. And I don't understand why we're doing that. That would seem to me to be a hindrance to development. And so I would love to hear more about that and see if there's any buy-in from others here that would agree with me that maybe that shouldn't be there.
That was an adopted policy, a shall statement in your 3 Mile Lane area plan.
So we can't have that discussion.
You can have it, we would need to amend the 3 Mile Lane area plan.
Okay, and that's going to be a much larger process. I won't look for that one. Next one, on the height of the buildings, I think in this discussion here, 65 feet. Is that correct?
Correct, for the industrial district, and I believe 50 for the commercial.
Okay. 65 feet represents how many stories? 6? Is that okay out in that area? Just give me a head and... Okay.
And I would also just point out that we arrived at the 65 feet because that is the current height in the light industrial zone for that area.
I understand. I'm looking at our airport manager
yeah.
and getting a feel for whether or not this is going to be problematic.
So the reality is the form number that I always forget that has to go to the FAA for height is based on sea level or something like that. We have a 200-foot cell tower out there that passed that review process.
Okay.
It's so all the development out there will, I'm sure the airport manager would make it go through this process, the form, to the FAA, which is measures height, and it measures height based on the patterns that are occurring at the airport.
Okay. And the last one I want to hit is the grocery store. I'm a little perplexed that the argument's being made that we have not enough standalone grocery stores. I understand you did a bunch of work on that, but that just anecdotal evidence doesn't, I don't think that we have too many, sorry.
Oh, yeah, because I was going to say.
Anecdotally, I would say that doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly with all the development that's occurring out on that end of town with lower income workforce housing that has occurred and is occurring. The number of housing units we've brought online in that area, the number one concern that I have heard from residents out in that area has been consistently the need for two things, a grocery store and a gas station.
Right.
And so I worry that the formula that's been created is going to lead to a subscription or membership-based type grocery store that would then result in the vast majority of those that are moving into that area not being able to get their groceries there.
No, I see what you're saying. You know, you can, so the market analysis is what said that, and that market analysis was from 2018, 19, I can't recall when. And you can, as a policy-making body, you can limit the size of whatever the largest tenant you want out there. And that, again, gets to the incentivizing, disincentivizing, right? And so if the market supports it and someone wants to locate a grocery store there and is comfortable doing that, then yay, right? What we heard from the data and the science was that there is a lot of square footage of standalone grocery stores in McMinnville relative to our population. Now, I always hear from people, but you just built 600 housing units there. Okay, so 600 housing units, our average household size is 2.5. Someone else do the math. 1,500 people, is that what that is? So 1,500 people is not going to support Winco on Highway 18. The pass-by traffic would.
Well, Winco's massive, but something smaller like an Albertsons or a Safeway or a Kroger's or whatever, that's, or a even better yet, well, no, I don't want to say that because I want to bring competition to one of them.
I guess what I'm suggesting is, I just had this conversation with someone yesterday about Trader Joe's. Each store, because we get asked how we can get these independent things everybody wants into a building in McMinnville all the time. Each type of business and industry has its own market in terms and data that shows what's successful and not successful. They know the number of demographics they need in their market area. They know the household income they need in their market area to locate somewhere. And if you don't meet that bare minimum threshold, you're usually weeded out. You're not even part of the consideration.
I get that. What I really want to make sure I have at the end of the day is a grocery store that meets the needs of the people that live out there, and not a grocery store that only meets the needs of those that are driving from out of the area to enjoy it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it's fine, and again, I would say that's fine, the balance between that boutique grocery store, which is the smaller one, the neighborhood grocery store, versus the memberships.
But if our policies are specifically geared at trying to bring in, and I know there are a lot of other options other than membership-based ones, but if our policies are specifically geared at trying to bring in stores that are both grocery stores and commercial stores, or regular retail, stores, then we're leading in toward a membership-based and that's where I guess I'm a little concerned. I don't want to put ourselves leading into that.
I could just offer one clarification about those standards. There is nothing in the zoning that in any way limit stores under 135,000 square feet. So the potential for a standalone grocery store of that size is unlimited on that site. The only limitations being proposed in the zoning code are to limit the number of those larger format stores over 135 square feet. So
I get that. The Planning Commission, I don't know what they did, but I remember having two different conversations at the council where we made it very clear as a body, and it was almost unified, that we wanted a grocery store as a requirement in there because there's nothing on that side of town.
Right, and I don't think we can say you can't develop unless you have a grocery store as a tenant. I just don't think we can do that. So then we're trying to develop regulations that will incentivize that to occur, and and disincentivize what you don't want to see happen there. So that's the question, and the discussion of standalone versus combined with something. So general merchandise is a huge retail leakage. We get visits all the time from, or interest all the time from general merchandisers looking for property in McMinnville to locate, because there's a market here. The data shows there's a market to capture those dollars, right? And so then the question would be, if we can capture the general merchandise, can we capture grocery with that?
Okay.
That was the discussion.
I get where we went, and I didn't like where we just went, but I understand.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, you are the policy-making body. We can write the code any way you want us to write the code. So if you wanted to say, we want to limit all retail tenants to X square footage, we can write a code that says that. If you want to say we want to limit all retail tenants to X square footage and allow the opportunity for two above that, one above that, to this maximum, we can do that as well. We're happy to do whatever you want us to do. We're just trying to provide you the basis for our recommendation to sort of start the conversation.
Okay, so lastly, I would be opposed to limiting lower than 4 on drive-throughs. I think part of what we wanted was to provide all the amenities also for the 2,110, if I remember the number correctly, number of employees that potentially could build out in the industrial side, and having drive-throughs for their lunches is going to be helpful. So I would not be in favor to limit that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilor Gary?
I'll throw in for the size maximums discussion as well. Specific to height, more in the design standard concept at the corners, which I know you specifically spent some time talking about. Is there any special language around how you govern height at those corners when you are encouraging people to be up at the corner with those buildings?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The height standard is measured the same at the corner as any other part on the building. And the height limit is not differentiated at the corners. In fact, there's a list of architectural features that need to be incorporated. It's a list to provide certainty and flexibility, so you can, it's a menu approach for developers. And there are a variety of features, such as, adding a pergola, not a pergola, that's the wrong architectural term. Let's say a tower or a campanile type element that could increase the height at the corner. That's one way to sort of create that corner building presence. But then there's other options like setting back the corner, or, having a plaza or a recessed entry that might actually result in lower height at the corner. So there's flexibility there, and it's not a single path.
I just know we've had design standards of buildings at corners that are supposed to appear to be shorter than they are allowed to be, and it's just caused confusion before, and so just wanted to make sure we were
that's
doing
not a
that.
part of these standards.
So for the $20 million in capital improvement costs for the transportation infrastructure, we talked about the wastewater SDCs funding the ability for us to take care of the conveyance back and forth for that. Does our current TSP have the funding models adequate enough to put in for those, that $20 million of infrastructure we need for this area?
So I think the $20 million figure was for all utilities, not just the transportation side of it. Are you talking about that table that was shown by Brady?
Yep.
Yeah. So the 20 million is for all infrastructure, so it included storm, water, wastewater, transportation. I was looking at the transportation one. It's the highest amount. It's 4 million.
Okay.
Of the 20 million, plus all the soft costs that are built below that. So 4 million plus.
So same question, different number.
Yeah. So it's probably 40, if I look at it, it was 4 million of 10 and then plus soft costs. So 40% of the cost was in transportation. Your question is, do we have SDCs in place already to capture that as a requirement for the development?
In our current TSP.
Yeah. We have in our current, no, I would say the current TSP is similar to the wastewater TSP, which is the CIP in that is fairly sparse. There's discussion in there. There is a project in there for frontage roads in this area, and there's a number associated with the frontage roads, which would cover the connection there, the intersection connection that you saw Todd describe there. But we would have to explore that a little bit further with our update of the TSP. The intention of the updated TSP is to do this whole 3 Mile Lane area as a special area, so look at it a deeper dive because there's a lot of transportation needs out there. The other thing I would say is it will be a requirement of development to pay for the improvements it needs to support the development. So when that planned development comes in, we would require them to do a traffic impact analysis, further utility analysis based on what they want to do. So let's talk about the larger tenant versus a smaller tenant. If it's a larger tenant, they draw a lot of traffic. What they're going to have to do for transportation improvements is going to be different than the smaller tenant that didn't draw that much traffic. And so that requirement at the intersection could change a little bit. The requirements inside the property could change a little bit, and that would be costs borne by the development, in addition to the SDCs.
Understood. Okay, and then last on PDF page 164, we have section 10, parks, open spaces in there. Then there's some sub-bullets, but down on that list of 1 through 9 things, a minimum of 3 pedestrian amenities that would need to be in the parks and open spaces in the McMinnville Landing Commons, it kicks over to other pedestrian-friendly features as approved by the planning director, and I think I'd be more comfortable in a parks and open spaces, given that discretion to the parks director.
So that is the private side requirements, not the public side requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So if
Under parks and open spaces.
Yes, in that section, it's talking about the requirements for the McMinnville Landing Commons, which will be a private facility. And so I included it in that section because it's a type of open space, but it's not the public parks and open space subsection. So the landing as a type of private open space is just organized there.
typically right now for what we do is we require open space as a requirement of private development for any sort of large subdivision, any planned development coming through, and apartments, multifamily. And so we have in our code a requirement of X number of square footage of your development needs to be put into a private open space. That is usually something that's decided through the land use process, and it goes through that. We do send everything for comments to all of our partner agencies so that they can weigh in on that. If there is if there's interest in doing, so if you think about Baker Creek North, which has several private parks associated in it, so it has that long linear park between the alley-loaded detached townhomes that has a playground. If we're developing something like that, we usually will reach out to the Parks Department or to our parks maintenance people and say, what would you recommend would be a good number of elements to meet these many households in a playground on this private park? We do have that type of back and forth. If you want for the McMinnville Landing, for it to be a different process where the Parks and Rec Director is the one making all those decisions for the private open space requirements, we can write that in as a policy.
Yeah, just the way it sets up the stage, remains functional and an asset not only to the surrounding properties, but to the larger community and the other words in here that make me feel like it wants to be part of McMinnville as a whole and be connective in look and feel to how the other parks and open spaces are in town. I would feel more comfortable with that being through the Parks and Rec Director at the time, but.
I would suggest most of our language in our zoning ordinance communicates about the community as a whole and the value of that. But again, if that's something that you want this particular development to go through that review process, we can write that into here.
Okay. That's my list. Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Chenoweth?
I just need to clarify something for the record. I am not opposed or in favor of a membership-based facility coming into our, what I'm concerned about is that the grocery aspect be one in which all can have access to it. So just to be really clear, I am not on either side of that particular fence.
Yes. Interim Manager Adam Garbin.
Thank you, Mayor. We're about 25 minutes over our work session allotted time tonight, and so I just wanted to do a time check with Heather and the mayor and see if there's any exact direction you need tonight, or if you want this body to forward questions on to you, if it's just a question format.
Thank you, City Manager. I think we've heard individual feedback. Again, because this is such a large project with a lot of varying opinions on it, it would be helpful for us to get direction on how you want to move forward with this. We have a final draft in front of you. If you want to make changes to the final draft that are policy decisions before we bring it through a public process. So our next step would be to notice the Department of Land Conservation and Development, set up a public hearing. We currently have that set up to be noticed October 28th after this work session. If this was enough time, we can look at another work session. There aren't any work sessions available until January, February, I think. Is that right? And we were looking to try and get this adopted before we need to get our land use efficiencies into the state by March 1. But if we can't do that, we can adjust everything. Our current game plan, October 28th, notice to DLCD, Planning Commission public hearing December 18th, to be able to have a couple of public hearings at Planning Commission, because we do expect it to be a public dialogue, and then getting it to City Council in February for one of your meetings for consideration. If you need more time to think about the big policy decisions in here, let's do that and schedule it in a future work session. If you wanted to direct it to the Planning Commission to work through, or you want to do it as two bodies, or just do it as City Council, we'd love that direction, because we'll have to set up those work sessions to do so.
Okay, I have a proposal. I think we can take care of this. There's only 3 items that I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we really need to go around and talk about. They're maximum size, drive-through, park and rec for the open space. Body agree that those are 3 things that we could go around and give direction on? Okay, so why don't we do one at a time? Well, first of all, the 2 of you have been over here looking at things. Do you have a proposed maximum size that we can talk about?
We were debating.
You're debating?
We did not agree.
Okay, can you tell me where you're at?
Well, I mean, the main part of the conversation was, what the maximum size should be. And Chair Winfield, I don't want to speak for her, but had concerns about setting the building footprint to the level that I was thinking would be appropriate, which I was thinking in the 170 to 180,000 square foot range, which is consistent with the lows that we have according to the document and Fred Meyer and Newburgh. And Chair Winfield had pointed out that those are rather large. And, for example, the Winco in town is 85,000 square feet. The Walmart's 118. And so she was expressing concerns about going to that 170 to 180,000 square foot range. Was that?
Sort of. The lows that we have is 135, and then the garden center is 30. So if we're looking at square footprint, then you've got the 165. But if you're looking at built out, it's 135, or it was 135. The old Costco in Salem, which is getting repurposed, is 145. And the average size for a Fred Meyer is 150. And so I was thinking if we would go, either stick with the 135 or go up to an average, I know, I'm sorry about this, the average subscription store is 147. So I was willing to be flexible around that. I just think that 170 for that area is really large. To have two bookends about that size is just, I think that's intimidating.
So is a compromise in there a 150 area?
Sure.
I'm all about negotiations.
Yeah, that's a Fred Meyer.
I would be interested in hearing,
other-
what other people have to say about it.
Just kind of want to. Anybody else do any research or have any thoughts? Stella?
I'm in favor of establishing a max, and I would say my max is between 150 and 170. I'm fine. I'm comfortable with anything in that range.
Yes, Rachel?
I have a question for staff. On the market analysis, when it was shared with you that a combination retail grocery would be a more likely incentivized business in the area, what would be an average max for that format? Or was that shared with you?
I can't recall if that was shared with us or not, and I don't have it in front of me. But I will say, per the discussion we just heard, a Fred Meyer is a general merchandise grocery store type of combo that we've been talking about.
I think a priority to me would be making sure that groceries in some form were available in that area of town where it's more difficult to get to in other places. So if that means being more lenient on maximum size, I prefer that. And I'll save my other feedback for when we're...
Because we have Fred Meyer, Target, those are all options that have a mix. Did you have a Target size in there?
Target's average large format build out right now is 150,000.
Okay.
Our average store size 130. The Argyle complex in Wilsonville is 43 acres. The Costco there is 149. The one thing to consider is all those numbers for square footage are at today's square footage needs. This project could take 20 years to build out. And so what is the maximum you want in 20 years?
My view is that the maximum size of stores is going down, not up, as we've heard a lot about retail leakage, but I think the biggest retail leakage in McMinnville is to Amazon, not to Salem or anywhere else. So, and I think, if anybody who's a Costco member can order all their products online currently, and so there'll be retail leakage that way, regardless of whether people choose to leave the city. So, my perspective is 150,000 is an average, and that's why I thought going up to 170 made sense to give the applicants more flexibility, but I'm flexible.
I would say, if I may, Mayor, before somebody jumps in and joins that bandwagon, I'm going to go with the 150. For a number of reasons. But when you're looking at...
Jump in next.
With Fred Meyer already being well described, Target being described, Costco's being described, all in that 150 range, that just makes sense to me. And the idea is to try to have it look that we don't have these monster stores. I would yield to our other chair in this room and say, I think 150 makes a lot of sense, and it's a good number.
And I'll just say my rational basis for it was the Fred Meyer in Newburgh is 180 and the Costco in Salem is 160. So they're both over 150. That's why I picked the higher number.
If I may, since he asked my opinion.
Counselor Tucker.
I hear a lot of people.
We'd love your opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I hear a lot of people dancing around numbers tonight, and it seems like we're going anywhere from trying to limit subscription stores to make sure that we get what we want. And it sounds to me, if we can get into the point where we're in the 160 zone, that we could just go ahead and move with that. So that's my proposal, 160.
Thank you,
I'm
Counselor.
going to ask a quick question of Elizabeth. Does the alternative path for design standards allow for an alternative? So let's say some fabulous retailer decides to come in and everybody really wants it, and it's over whatever our maximum size is. Would the alternative path allow that to go to the Planning Commission for consideration and discussion?
Well, I'm grateful for the feedback tonight. So the code is not written that way right now. I would say the alternative design pathway is probably not the best way to do that, because that implies that there's like a design principle that's being achieved. And we've defined that through the design standards and those issues. And so I think that the size issue, if I were to make a suggestion, would be to create different categories in the use table, and make a conditional use for a larger size if you wanted to have a discretionary review option on some larger formats.
So, with the struggle of, will we miss something by limiting it by 10,000 square feet down to whatever, right? Figuring out the threshold. If there's a relief valve in there to consider something that's larger than, but could be a great asset to the city, I guess that's what I would recommend.
I think that's viable. I think that's a good use of that area. It gives an idea of what we're looking for, because we don't want some monstrosity, but if there's something that really can't be flexible, that needs just 10,000 more square feet, but they're willing to work within the design standards and make it look so it's fitting in,
Yeah.
and there's a relief.
So maybe your decision is, what's the maximum that's allowed without the developer being scared of going in front of a public body of discretionary decision makers? And then if they really feel like to me, I always tell developers, if you think it's a great idea, your job is to convince the decision-making body it's a great idea too. That's why that's set up for that process. So maybe the standard is such and such under so much square foot is allowed, and a conditional use is anything over that.
Sounds fine.
So 160 and anything over would.
I would just say if we had that valve, I'd be fine with the 150, as long as we have the valve where people can still bring a project forward.
Okay. So, yes?
And if I could, the other thing that would be really helpful to hear from you all is, if we're having this relief valve and we're saying, well, if it's really great for the city, it would be helpful to hear a little bit more about what would make it great for the city, so that we can add some of that specificity and hopefully set you up for future reviews that are.
Well, I think the big concern, I'm going to take a guess and speak for the group, is that having accessible groceries at that end of town. And I think, I'm guessing we can't write that in. If it's a grocery store, you're in. And I personally also like the idea of a mixed grocery store, because it offers more amenities than just groceries to people. It offers other things that people need. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you all have the language.
We could ask legal counsel. My initial concern was, if the grocery store goes out of business and another tenant comes in. I mean, we don't like to manage tenants. We like to manage size of buildings and that type of thing. But I guess if we had something where we'd have to look at legal counsel and see if if we could do that. I mean, if you really wanted to say we're limiting it to grocery stores and the grocery store goes out, then they would have to make the tenant spaces smaller inside that building.
Yeah. Mayor, is this something that we can just ask that this is what we'd like to do and find out if it's possible?
Again, we just like to get consensus.
Right. Okay. Jessica? Well, what does it have to do with this?
Well, I'm sort of, in the interest of time, I'm willing to give my direction, I guess. And that is, I appreciate the detailed work like Council President said, and I appreciate Adam trying to kind of bring us back. I'm fond of the draft we have in front of us today for several reasons. Part of it is, to Adam's point, that it could be 5 years or 50 years. So putting a number on anything is challenging because we don't understand what the needs are. And I feel like a little bit like maybe we're beating this dead horse already because there's no guarantee that any store over 135,000 feet is going to come in, period. So I'm fine with letting this process just play out how it's going to play out, and we don't have the benefit of seeing the future. So if you want 150,000 cap, I'm not going to stand in the way, but my preference is to not cut off the feet of a project that so many people have worked so hard for.
Okay, I'm going to go around with 150 cap and get with the consensus. Somebody needs to keep track. Scott Cunningham, you're good with the 150? Rachel?
I prefer to keep it as originally written.
Jessica? Sal?
150.
Original.
150.
Yeah,
150.
150. 150.
I say 150. Okay, so we got that down, and I'm starting to choke. Drive-through, are we good with 4, or do we want to make a change?
Good with 4.
4. Dan?
4.
Chris?
4.
Philip?
I will go with the good of the order.
Okay, so 4. Zach?
4.
Pass. Pass?
4.
3.5. No, 4 is fine.
0 would be my.
4.
3 Dutch Bros.
Okay, sounds like 4 is fine.
Burger King.
Yes.
Just one clarification on the Dutch Bros and the drive-through is that the standards are written to require an interior service area where you can actually go in and eat on your lunch break. You don't have to sit and have a sad lunch in your car.
Right. Okay, I think I've gathered my, yeah. So then the last question that came up that was to be considered was whether the park amenities needed to go before the park and rec director. Oh my goodness. Okay,
I would say leave it with the planning.
planner?
I'm going with the parks.
I'm not even understanding this particular question.
Good, then we'll pass you. So,
It was easy.
Planner.
Parks.
we'll come back to you.
I'll pass on.
Planner.
So?
I don't understand the distinction.
Okay, so let's go. So right now, let's see if I can do this in layman's terms. Right now, when there's a park within here, then the planner talks about what amenities are going to be in there, and you take it to ET, the executive team, to take a look at, or the Parks Department. But you have the final decision. Is that correct? Versus the final decision coming from the Park and Rec Director.
Right now, our code is written that all land use applications, the final decision is through the planning director or the decision-making body it's assigned to go to. So final decisions are made by planning director or the planning commission or the city council based on the path, right? Or his or her designee. And so when it's any land use application, when it comes in that has different aspects to it that aren't really simple, like a sign permit, we send it to what we call our partner agencies for comments, which includes the Public Works Department, and so that picks up Parks Maintenance, includes MAC Water and Light, it includes the Parks and Rec Department, police, just the variety of people. And so they all have the opportunity to comment. And so they provide their comments. When there are parks involved in if we're requiring private parks as part of the development project, and those private parks are also being required to provide amenities of some sort, a playground or something of that nature, we will reach out to our parks partners and say, what do you think? And so that includes both Parks Maintenance and the Parks and Rec. They're in 2 different departments. And then they provide their comments. The final decision in the code is either the planning commission, city council, or the planning director. So for these, the plan development would come to the planning commission. They would be the final decision-making body right now as it's written. If you change that, it would be the park and rec director. I think that's what Councilor Geary's talking about, is the park and rec director is the final decision-making body for that. Or are you saying that the park and rec director is the final decision-making body as to what goes up to the planning commission?
No, I'm just interpreting from PDF page 164 in our packet, the section 10 under how you're going to make all these decisions, where it talks about the parks and open spaces and the standards for what those developers are going to bring in. Lists a whole bunch of things about how it's going to be a part of the larger community, parks and open spaces, and a sub-bullet, McMinnville Landing Commons, and another sub-bullet, a minimum of 3 pedestrian amenities, which may include but are not limited to the following, and then it lists 9 things. The 9th thing, after number 8 being play structures, 9 is other pedestrian-friendly features as approved by planning director. In this parks and open spaces, I think if we want to have it be homogeneous with the larger community of how people play and recreate and have open spaces, I think that would be features approved by the parks director.
Okay, we have everybody understand the question?
Yeah, so Elizabeth is asking me, does our code allow the parks director to make land use decisions? They did adopt a policy as part of the comp plan that allowed the Parks and Rec director to make final decisions on elements in the parks plan. These would be private side elements, not public side elements, but yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
So is this, you said as part of your policy, if something comes before you for park, in a private park setting, you're going to go to all these different players, correct?
Yes, our internal protocol is we send all of our land use applications, except for the ones that are really basic, to what we call our partner agencies. There's about 40 people on that, 40 different agencies on that list to collect comments.
Okay. Yeah, keep it the way it is. Don't change it.
Okay. We're going to go.
Yep, keep it the way it is. Consistent.
I already voted for parks.
Okay, just clarifying. Thank you for that, though.
Hold and steady.
Chris?
Keep it the way it is.
Parks.
As it's written.
As written.
Okay.
Same.
As written.
As written.
As written.
Okay. As written, I think we got all the direction from what I heard around the table. This is your last final ability to have a comment. Anything?
Yes, thank you for all the work that got us to this place.
Yes. Good job.
Thank you, Mayor, for.
You're welcome, but great job. And thank you for all the consultants. You did a great job. Appreciate it. So I am going to close this part, 8:46. Well, let me read this first. So the city council will be going into the conference room for close to the public special called city council executive session pursuant to ORS 192.6602H. Consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. Does any counselor need to declare an actual potential conflict of interest or recuse themselves regarding this executive session for the record? All right, I will now adjourn the meeting at 8:46.
Can I get
To
150?
the Planning Commission for joining us. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.